Hi, welcome to Formula Citizen, episode 3. I'm your host, Nate Godfrey. Thank you so much for joining me. This is a recap from the Chinese Formula One Grand Prix. I've actually waited a few days to record this podcast in the hope that we might have a decision or an announcement from the Red Bull racing team around the future of Liam Lawson. And just in the last few hours, we've seen breaking news that Liam will be demoted and replaced by Yuki Tsunoda. Those rumors and that noise has kind of been circulating for the last few days. The announcement has now been made. I just want to spend a few minutes just drilling down into that decision, as opposed to just having a debate around who the better driver is between Liam and Yuki. I want to focus more on the organization, the decision-making process at an executive level, and more importantly, the communication around that decision. The question I want to start with and just pose to you, and I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts on this. 2 races, a sufficient sample size. Is that enough data to assess an athlete's performance? Red Bull talked about data. They used data last year to assess Sergio Perez's performance. They've clearly backed Liam in as the future of Red Bull alongside Max Verstappen and identify him as a talent. They've effectively retired 2 veterans of Formula One, 2 members of the Red Bull family, and Sergio Perez and Daniel Ricciardo. Those 2 guys have been retired from the sport of Formula One because Red Bull are backing in Liam Lawson. That was the decision that was taken at the end of last year. And they're 2 guys that have had over 500 race starts and have won 14 Grand Prix. So that makes a statement about Red Bull's intent and their commitment to support Liam Lawson's career, right? And after 2 races, he's been dropped. Ruthless. So let's speak to that in a bit more detail. In race 1 in Melbourne, a track that he'd never driven at, he sat out FP3. He sat out a whole practice session with mechanical issues, and he sat in the garage while all the other teams got track time and started to develop their car and prepare for qualifying. He clearly went in underdone, and that mechanical issue clearly compromised his performance on the Saturday. And again, on Sunday, we had a wet race. It was raining. So we put that data set to one side and we say, look, that race was compromised for him. The really interesting point for me is that nobody has talked about the fact that his preparation was compromised in FP3. I think that's a very important point that we should note. And then we moved to Shanghai, to China. Again, a track that he's never driven at. And because it was a sprint race weekend, they get 1 free practice session. He's clearly struggling with the really narrow operating window of the car, in particular, getting the tyre temp right for qualifying, and it compromised his performance. But at the end of the day, we're talking about 2 race weekends. It's the equivalent of assessing an athlete after 2 matches in another sport and making an informed decision. Liam is 12 races into his Formula One career, and the team has taken this decision, I believe, prematurely. The other question we need to ask is, what next if Yuki struggles? If Yuki struggles in this seat, in the second Red Bull seat, what next? Red Bull don't have any more outs. You've had a situation where Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon, Sergio Perez, Liam Lawson have all struggled in that seat. I don't know what the future holds for the team if they're not able to make this work. The other really interesting point here is that money talks. Clearly, Honda have been involved in terms of influencing the outcome of this decision. They met with the Red Bull Formula One board on Monday. It's widely reported that Yuki's career has been supported by Honda to the tune of around 10 million euros per season. Perhaps there's been an uplift or an investment made in securing that second Red Bull seat for 2025. No issues with that whatsoever. The bigger question for me, if we kind of zoom out and look at this thing from a kind of macro perspective, is are we seeing the decline of the Formula One Red Bull racing team? This is a dynasty. In every sporting code and every sporting league, we see dynasties. This is an organization that since 2010 has won 14 world championships, 14 Formula One world championships, 8 drivers' championships, and 6 constructors' championships. Incredibly successful. But we're not just seeing underperformance on the track. We're seeing an exodus and an unrest off the track from a cultural perspective. We're seeing the likes of Adrian Newey and Jonathan Wheatley and other senior figures within the organization depart. And it comes down to whether the organization can attract talent, can elevate talent from within their organization, and what succession plans they have in place, and how quickly they can rebuild. If Max Verstappen was to lead the team at the end of the year, you would officially say that Red Bull are in a rebuild phase. And then it comes down to the leadership, the board and Christian Horner, and how quickly they can turn that around and stabilize the organization. So again, we see this in every organization. There's ebbs and flows. You learn more from your losses than you do from your successes. And it'll be really interesting to see how this storyline plays out throughout the course of 2025. Moving forward, just before we talk about China, I want to touch on a couple of comments I've received from people listening in. Thank you so much for your comments. The first one was a question around, is that a rig? Is that a Formula One simulator next to you in the office? Yes, it is. I have a lot of fun on that. It's a hobby and it helps fuel my passion. The other statement was just a comment from a listener around the fact that they love this kind of mix of commercial and marketing conversations as well as the performance on the track. So I'll try and continue that. But yeah, thank you so much for your feedback. All right, let's talk about China. The race weekend started with the sad news that Eddie Jordan had passed away, legend of the sport, former team boss. I just wanted to touch on a couple of points. One is the really beautiful eulogy that Martin Brundle shared on race day. Very emotional. Shout out to Martin. I love your work. Also, during the week, I listened to a couple of podcasts, and Crofty and Ted Kravitz kind of spoke about their friendship with EJ and some of their most fondest memories of their time with him. Clearly a character, clearly a reminder to us all that life is for living, that life is fun, and that Formula One is fun. It's an entertainment product at the end of the day. So may you rest in peace, Eddie. I'll just finish with a quote from him, which really resonated for me. He described Formula One as sex on wheels. And he talked about the beauty of the sport and the fact that it got a grip on him the moment he heard that V10 engine. And it was the same for me. If you listen to episode 1 of Formula Citizen, you'll hear me talk about as a 7-year-old boy visiting Adelaide and hearing that V10 engine just scream through the streets of Adelaide. And that's the moment that I fell in love with the sport. So I'm sure many of you have had that moment as well. Would love to hear from you. But again, really sad news with the passing of Eddie Jordan. All right, moving forward, there were some changes to the regulations leading into this race. So an immediate change from the FIA was the announcement that the rear wing deflection test would change. It was obviously hoped that would be an element of equalization in terms of performance. We didn't quite see that. But the big change is coming at the end of race 8 when there's a regulation change being implemented around the front wing deflection test. So let's wait and see how that plays out. In the meantime, just a snapshot of China. This is the first of 6 sprint race weekends. It always feels like a more intense race weekend, a very busy weekend. There's a lot of content around it when you have a sprint weekend. There's no time to rest and certainly plenty to digest over the weekend. They resurfaced the track, so there's a lot of question marks around how that would perform and whether it would be a 1-stop or 2-stop race strategy. There was probably lower tyre deg than what a lot of people thought, and a lot of the drivers picked up on that pretty early. The other really unique point about this track in Shanghai is the fact that it puts a lot of load on the front left tyre coming out of kind of the long right-hander in turn 2 and also turn 14 coming onto the straight. Puts a huge load on that front left tyre, and obviously really interesting to see how drivers cope with that as well. Just from a championship perspective, just think about this for a moment in terms of performance. In the sprint race on Saturday, we had a Ferrari and a Red Bull on the front row. And on Sunday, we had a McLaren and a Mercedes on the front row. That says a lot about how competitive the 2025 season is and the potential fight that lies ahead. Super exciting from a fan perspective to see that. I also wanted to touch on qualifying. So I've just kind of looked at the qualifying performance of the top 10 drivers across the Friday and the Saturday, because they qualified twice effectively, and looking at their consistency, but also secondly, anything they've learned and their ability to make a step and make gains. Oscar Piastri, for example, started third and then started first. Hamilton was first and fifth, so took a step back. Verstappen second and fourth. Russell fifth and second. Norris sixth and third. Leclerc fourth and sixth. They're kind of the leading drivers, but the notable performances from some other form drivers at the moment. Kimi Antonelli seventh and eighth. Very consistent from a rookie and only his second race. Yuki Tsunoda, 8th and 9th in qualifying. Again, he's in very good form at the moment. Alex Albon, 9th and 10th in the Williams. They were kind of 3 standout kind of informed drivers for me that I wanted to make note of as well. Let's talk about some trends that we're already starting to see in 2025. Carlos Sainz out-qualified by his teammate 0-3 at the moment. Really interesting. Coming in as potentially the more senior figure in that team. Alex Albon's taken a significant step. He was always identified as a talent, but he's clearly making a statement at the moment in that team. And at the moment, the concerning thing for me is Williams have a very good car that's capable of scoring points, and they have a very good driver in Carlos Sainz, who at the moment isn't able to extract the necessary performance. So I think that's a concern for the team, that they're not banking points early in the season. Lance Stroll is a lot more competitive this year in qualifying against his teammate. Hard to measure Fernando Alonso's performance at the moment. He's had 2 DNFs in the races this season, but clearly has one eye on 2026. As we talked about, Yuki Tsunoda's in good form, as is Isaac Hadjar. Both of them have out-qualified Liam Lawson in the Racing Bulls car, which is clearly a lot more drivable than the senior Red Bull team. I wanted to spend some time and talk about Lando Norris. In episode 1, I presented a case for why I believe Oscar Piastri can win the world title in 2025. And I talked about the inconsistency in Lando Norris's driving performances. Yes, he was strong in Australia, but in China, it wasn't just the braking issue that he had on race day on Sunday. If we go all the way back to Friday, he locked a brake in qualifying for the sprint race and started 6th. By the end of lap 1, he was 9th. He'd made an error in lap 1. And this is what I've talked about. He has a track record, and the data will suggest this, of traveling backwards through the pack in the opening lap of races. So I've got concerns about his racecraft. In qualifying for the main race, he also locked a brake, started 3rd, and again had some challenges that have been well documented in the race itself. At the moment, it's happy families within the McLaren team. Both of them are talking tough, but I genuinely believe at some point this year there's going to be a flashpoint where maybe one of the drivers gets on a run or has a run of performances and the other one's under pressure. We see the team trying to control or manage the environment or a race, and the drivers will break those papaya rules. There's too much at stake for that not to happen, but clearly at the moment it's early days and both drivers have had their moments, but it's going to be really interesting to see if Oscar can continue to mount a challenge. He's clearly pulled back a significant points differential in the weekend in China, which was important for him to make that statement. He's clearly taken a step. I just don't see any weaknesses in his performance at the moment. And if he can continue to do what he did last weekend, where he was incredibly dominant all weekend and incredibly consistent, he's going to be a serious threat for Lando Norris in terms of the championship fight. The other thing I'd speak to on this point is that if these two keep trading blows and they're in equal cars and they keep taking points off each other, and George Russell and Max Verstappen, who are informed drivers in their respective teams, and bear in mind that both those teams are going to back their drivers in as the senior leaders of those teams. If they continue to collect points, they stay in the championship fight. And that's what we're already seeing early stages, but we're already seeing George and Max collecting points, staying within reach of the McLaren drivers in that championship fight. So at the moment, it's really tight. But yeah, look forward to seeing how that plays out throughout the course of the year. It's going to be spicy. All right, moving forward. The other really interesting conversation is the midfield pack. So in previous years, these teams have struggled to even collect any points. And what we're seeing already this year after 2 races is that the midfield teams have collected 50 points between them. So Williams are sitting on 17 points. They're 4th in the Constructors' Championship battle standings with Ferrari. Haas have got 14 points. Aston Martin 10 points, Kick Sauber 6 points, Racing Bulls 3 points. So again, these teams are demonstrating that on any given day, if a couple of the top drivers in the top 4 teams struggle, which is what we're already seeing, that these teams are there to mop up the points and are highly competitive. So again, all supporting a really exciting Formula One season in 2025. I'm just going to quickly run through some points around race performances. I'll start at the back and move my way forward. Sauber, really disappointing weekend. Clearly took a step back from where they were in Melbourne. That was probably magnified by the fact that Haas took a significant step forward in their performance. They were nowhere in Australia. And for Esteban Ocon to finish P5 and Ollie Beerman to finish P8, double points finish, really impressive driving performance from both of those guys, and the team collected a good haul of points. So again, really good weekend for Haas. Alpine, Pierre Gasly was disqualified, unfortunately. Jack Doohan finished kind of 10 seconds off the pace. He's clearly being benchmarked against Pierre Gasly at the moment. And just bear in mind that we have this kind of rumor around an exit clause in his contract that can be triggered at the end of race 5. So he clearly needs to continue to develop over the next few races to hold his seat. Aston Martin, as I mentioned, Alonso's had 2 DNFs. Lance Stroll's looking strong. Again, not much to talk about there, and clearly one eye, if not both eyes, on 2026. The Williams team, again, in really good form, need to continue to collect points. Alex Albon is in the form of his life and dominating Carlos Sainz at the moment, which is a really interesting storyline. Yuki Tsunoda would have scored points, but had an issue with his front wing, but is clearly in good form. As we talked about, Max had a really quiet race, was very patient, and then the car came alive late. And if you want to see Max Verstappen's brilliance, take a look at a replay of the Chinese Formula One Grand Prix. Look at lap 52 and lap 53 and just watch the overtake on Charles Leclerc and the way he set him up. It was absolutely beautiful. So yeah, really impressive drive from Max Verstappen. The Mercedes team, Kimi Antonelli, 2 really strong performances in Melbourne and Shanghai, collecting points for the team, keeping his nose clean, just doing everything you'd expect from a rookie. He's only 18 years old, very personable off the track. I really enjoyed watching Martin Brundle during his grid walk speak to Ollie Beerman and Kimi Antonelli just before the race. They were just kind of chatting about how the wind conditions had shifted and they needed to be aware of it. They talked about how they get a bit nervous before the race, and just very endearing, very marketable guys and the future of the sport. Ferrari had a really up and down weekend, ended with 2 disqualifications, which is devastating for the team, sets them back a long way in terms of their fight for the Constructors' title. But more importantly, just the ups and downs across the weekend. Lewis Hamilton was so strong on Saturday, struggled for pace on Sunday, clearly took the car in a different setup direction, which didn't benefit him. Every Formula One fan loved seeing him win in red. Like it was iconic to see him stepping out of the red Ferrari with his arms in the air, to see all of the Chinese fans, Team LH44 in China that support him, was a great moment, and just wonderful to see that. And again, it takes a lot of pressure off him as well in terms of his decision to move to Ferrari. But more importantly, on the Sunday, Charles Leclerc passed him and had more pace than Lewis, but was in a car with a broken front wing, lost about 30 points of downforce. And what might have been possible if he hadn't had that damage to the car, we don't know. He took a step from Saturday in terms of his setup in the direction of the car. So clearly they're still struggling at the moment around the balance of that car, but clearly, and most importantly, an improvement from where they were in Melbourne, which is encouraging. I've spoken about McLaren. I just wanted to speak to the advantage of qualifying first. And in fact, this battle will come down to who is sitting at the front of the grid on race day. At the end of the day, you've got 2 guys who are equally matched, 2 number 1 drivers in the team, as anointed by their team, in equal equipment. Very hard to expect one of those guys to pass the other in the same car. So you would have to think that qualifying performance is going to be critical. I don't buy into Lando Norris's post-race interviews around the fact that if he didn't have brake issues, he would have mounted a challenge on Oscar. Oscar dominated him all weekend. He was in great form and clearly in a mood to win, to collect points. And we'll see how Lando bounces back next weekend. This is one of the fascinations about an intra-team battle, is the fact that there's this psychology that's going to be taking place every week. Just finally, I want to touch on the standings, give you an idea of how close it is. Lando Norris on 44 points, Max Verstappen on 36 points, George Russell on 35 points, and Oscar Piastri on 34 points. So we wanted this close battle, this championship fight, and at this stage, we've got that. I just want to leave you with a quote from Zach Brown, where he said, "We predicted 2025 would be an epic season, and that's what we're starting to see." Thank you so much for listening. Bye.